Hey folks, this is Rhykker with an Overwatch video on the latest comic, Binary. We're going to go through and analyze this new comic to see if we learn anything new about Overwatch lore. The too long didn't watch version is that we learn how Bastion becomes a part of the Overwatch crew, or otherwise affiliated with them, and we explore the beginning of a character arc for Torbjorn. Okay, let's start with the promotional tweet that describes this comic. Binary. As a terror from the past reemerges in rural Sweden, a mysterious stranger steps up to hunt it down. From the image, we can immediately assume that the terror from the past is Bastion, who is looking quite menacing and quite awesome. I need that skin. As for the mysterious stranger, because this takes place in Sweden, it's a safe bet that it'll be everyone's favorite Swedish engineer, Torbjorn. Sorry, Baltzar von Platten. Okay, let's dive into the comic. So we start off in northern Sweden. Some young couple is looking for a makeout spot when suddenly a terrifying bird appears. Now it turns out it's not Ganymede they're afraid of, but in fact a very spooky looking Bastion. What's interesting is that these kids, who are clearly too young to have been involved in the Omnic Crisis, immediately recognize what a Bastion is. He is dripping wet, he has starfish on him, an octopus, so he clearly just emerged from water. News reports start going up in Sweden about this, and of course the media starts to sensationalize, as it is wont to do, so it's good to know that in the future, the media is just as scummy. Now we have this fellow here holding a meeting, trying to discuss how to deal with this. He's complaining that the military won't help, and while he seems to be a politician, I believe he's actually the chief of police, as we'll see in a bit. A voice speaks up from the crowd, and we can't quite see who it is, because he is super short. Torbjorn looks more heroic than ever. He drops a few lines showing his vast knowledge of the Bastion unit, and he decides to go tackle this threat. He leaves his cryptic line when asked if he's fought Bastions before. He says something like that, and we find out why in a little bit here. Now right away Torbjorn recognizes that this Bastion is malfunctioning because it has spotted humans, it's been spotted by humans, and it's not attacked. So he feels here that what's needed is not a military approach, but an engineer's approach. While he insists to go in solo, Mr. Chief of Police comes. He's clearly not a politician because no politicians would put themselves in danger. This is when we find out that Torbjorn actually helped to create the Bastion units. That's why he said something like that before. And this also helps explain why Torbjorn wants to get involved. This is one of his creations that's gone haywire. We also notice that he tosses this odd orb object. This is not an armor pack. This seems to be some kind of Bastion ability that we have not seen before. Regardless, Torbjorn is clearly torn over the fact that, yes, he is responsible for creating these Bastion units that ended up killing so many human lives. Before we can find out what that orb does, the Bastion unit approaches. And as we anticipate this little floating orb doing something, instead of Bastion approaching, in comes Ganymede. Then Dickface McGee here starts shooting off his gun, prompting Bastion and Ganymede to flee, which Torbjorn finds exceptionally odd since they're not programmed to run. Torbjorn starts mulling things over. Again, this isn't adding up. Bastions aren't supposed to retreat from a battle. He notices that it's acting peaceful, but he still does not trust it. He figures it's only a matter of time before that programming is going to kick in and it's going to go on a murder rampage. Once again, that orb comes out, and Torbjorn is still more confused at Bastion being peaceful with the wildlife, now beavers, but he still doesn't trust him. He tosses the orb and gets ready, and he's just waiting for that Bastion to take some kind of aggressive gesture to set off whatever that orb is going to do. As Torbjorn is urging the Bastion to be aggressive, it speaks more to him wanting justification for his mistrust, something that he's held on to for so many years. He's had this worldview for decades that Omnics are bad. Not that they're evil, but they're not to be trusted. They just mindlessly follow their programming, follow logic. That's why you can't trust them. And this Bastion unit right now is messing with his worldview. Here, Bastion instead extends some twigs. Now, if we remember, in the animated short for Bastion, The Last Bastion, Ganymede offers Bastion a twig. Bastion has learned that this is a form of a gesture of friendship. So as the branch was extended to him, he now extends it to Torbjorn. And Torbjorn can't even right now. Look at that face. Ganymede senses something and flies off, leaving Bastion confused when Dickface McGee returns the reinforcements. Torbjorn tries to get them to stop shooting, but it's too late. Bastion has fled, once again choosing not to fight back. At this point, Torbjorn has recognized that there's something different or special about this Bastion, but he's not sure that he's quite willing to admit that to himself yet, let alone others. To be fair, the chief of police replies with something very reasonable. For all intents and purposes, every other Bastion in history has been a murder-kill bot, and it's this guy's job to keep the people safe. If I were him, I would probably want that thing destroyed too. We see here the start of Torbjorn's view shifting. This Bastion is different, and if this Bastion can change, then what else does that mean? He can't even bring himself to finish that thought. And just as the coppers are getting ready to arrest Torbjorn, he finally sets off the orb and we get to see what it does. It turns out it was housing the flying spaghetti monster all along. Now it's a bunch of ropes that tie everyone up to trees. The chief of police cries out, "Don't you have enough blood on your hands?" And as Torbjorn walks off, he says, "Enough for a lifetime." His guilt is clear. He's had this weighing on him for years. Meanwhile, Bastion is completely unfazed and back to looking at pretty flowers. Torbjorn catches up to him, expresses that he's coming in peace. Bastion keeps giving him more offerings, and thus begins an unusual friendship. Torbjorn is still being gruff with Bastion, but there's something there. He does affirm that they're not friends. He clearly still doesn't trust the Bastion, but you can tell the Bastion is starting to win him over. And as the two walk off into the sunset, we just hope to see more of the wonderful misadventures of Bastion and Torbjorn. Sort of an odd couple kind of thing. So that's the comic. Now let's get into some analysis, starting with Bastion. While Bastion doesn't go through an arc, a character arc, in this comic, we see that he has gone through an arc between his animated short and this comic. When Bastion first awoke in his animated short, he was going through some kind of robot PTSD. The sound of a woodpecker would set him off on a rampage. But in this comic, he is actively shot at by real threats, and he remains peaceful. This tells us that Bastion is in a better place now. He has learned to cope with his past, with his PTSD, if you want to call it, and he has learned more about the world and how to avoid conflict. Also, this comic explains why Bastion is in the game at all, since the characters we play are largely either members of Overwatch or organizations that oppose Overwatch, or people somehow involved in conflicts that Overwatch finds itself involved in. Now we know how this peaceful, conflict-averting robot has come into the picture. Torbjorn found him and brought him back to study. And that brings us to Torbjorn's arc. Now Torbjorn, as far as we've known, has always been decidedly anti-Omnic. He never trusted sentient robot intelligence. And when so much of the technology that he created ended up helping the robot uprising during the Omnic Crisis, that basically cemented his worldview. And even after the Omnic Crisis was resolved, he's opposed to even giving peaceful Omnics the same rights as humans. He also feels guilty and partially responsible for all the lives lost during the Omnic Crisis. As revealed in this comic, he helped build the Bastion units that ultimately turned on humanity and formed the brunt of the Omnic army. So it may seem odd that Torbjorn in this comic has such a drastic change of heart, but that's not really what's happening. What we're seeing is the start of an arc. His stance on Omnics hasn't changed, not yet. He's just recognized an Omnic that's not behaving as expected. It's not doing what it was programmed to do, which is kill all humans. Call it a malfunction, call it transcending its programming, whatever it is. The scientist in Torbjorn wants to study this Bastion in order to determine what is making it peaceful. And this is likely so that he can apply what he learns to the Omnics that are still posing a threat to humans. Imagine if this Bastion was the carrier of a cure to what is driving the bad Omnics to want to take over the world. What if the rest of the bad Omnics can be cured? Blizzard has run storylines like this before in Warcraft. In Warcraft 1 and Warcraft 2, the orcs were just an evil, villainous race. But in Warcraft 3, they retconned that and they explained that the orcs were under demonic influence driven by bloodlust. A good part of the Warcraft story then became about freeing the orcs from this demonic influence. Similarly, we may see the story of Overwatch culminate in world peace via curing the evil Omnics rather than killing them. And Bastion may be the key. If Omnics share some kind of link with each other, and odds are that the Omnics created by the Omniums, that is all the bad Omnics, do have some kind of intelligence that is linked via some kind of intranet or whatever, then Bastion might even become some kind of wireless beacon that can transmit that cure like via some kind of Wi-Fi virus. And if this were to happen, then this would conclude a redemption arc for Torbjorn. The only way that he's gonna let go of his guilt at this point is if the Omnic threat is stopped. One way or another. What better way than if Torbjorn learns to cure them? Alright, now I want to tackle the topic of Bastion's trek from Germany to Sweden. Some people are questioning this. In the Bastion short, we know that Bastion was awakened near the city of Stuttgart, which is in southern Germany, which is about as far away as you can get from Sweden while still being in Germany. Well, let's look at Google Maps. We're going to select Stuttgart as our starting point, and let's pick the Swedish city of Kalix as our ending point, since it's in northern Sweden and close to the shore. We know from the comic that Bastion emerged from the water in northern Sweden. Once we let Google run that calculation, we see that those two cities are about a 490-hour walk away from each other by land. That's about 20 days of non-stop walking. Now, this time frame is very reasonable for a robot that has nothing better to do than wander around aimlessly and learn about the world. We're not sure what path he may have taken, how much he meandered, only that he was underwater at some point. His longest possible underwater path would see him enter the Baltic Sea from Germany's northern shore, cross through the Gulf of Bothnia, and emerge in Sweden, spending likely over 15 days underwater, giving him plenty of time to discover all manner of underwater life and have animals attach themselves to him. His shortest underwater path would have seen him go northeast across Europe and ultimately enter the Gulf of Bothnia via Finland before arriving in Sweden after just a couple days underwater. We don't know what his path was, but both are reasonable options. Now you may ask, how does a robot travel for days underwater without being destroyed? Wouldn't the salt water rust him? Wouldn't his circuits be fried? Wouldn't the pressure at those depths mess him up? The answer to all those questions is apparently not. While this may initially seem unrealistic, we have this technology today. We have deep sea probes, and they don't get destroyed. So we know that Bastion is waterproof enough and rust-proof enough to survive underwater for at least a few days. But then you may ask, what about Ganymede? Yeah, that's a good question, and something of a possible plot hole. Ganymede doesn't seem like the kind of bird that can fly long distances over water, but we ultimately don't know what breed of bird Ganymede is, only that he or she was modeled after a Blizzard artist's pet parrot. We also know that in the real world there are some small birds that are able to cross the Atlantic Ocean without stopping, so it's not out of the realm of possibility for Ganymede to be able to cross a vast distance over sea. Also, Ganymede may have taken a path that involved flying over little islands or outcrops in order to take a break here and there. The bigger issue really is how Ganymede and Bastion coordinated their migration to Sweden. With Bastion underwater long enough and deep enough to get an octopus and starfish stuck to him, how did Ganymede possibly keep track of him? I'd say this is a bit of a plot hole, but it's forgivable since Ganymede is adorable. Alright, the last thing that I want to talk about is that little spaghetti bomb that Torbjorn used to ensnare the cops. There's some speculation that this was foreshadowing a Torbjorn rework, that either this will become a new Torbjorn Ultimate or maybe even replace his toss armor feature. While certainly within the realm of possibility, I doubt this will happen. This Tangle Mine, it would be very similar to Mei's ult, which largely serves the same purpose, to control an area. It would basically be a mixture of Mei's ult and Junkrat's Steel Trap and Junkrat's Concussion Mine. Like Mei's ult, it controls a large area, ensnares enemies caught within it. Like Junkrat's Steel Trap, it would do no damage. And like his Concussion Mine, he would have to trigger it. Power-wise, this tentacle hentai bomb definitely seems more in line with an ultimate power than just a regular ability. But the big issue that I see here is that the animation would prove a huge challenge. Ropes are really tricky to pull off in games. How often in a game do you see an animated rope? You'll see a straight line representing a rope, right? Or you'll see ropes that are hanging and bent, but you very rarely see a rope bending around like a snake and twirling and stuff. Unless it's just a flat animation. I'm saying as a 3D object, that's exceptionally rare. Not only would they have to animate the ropes, but then also how would you depict the characters tied up by the ropes? When May freezes someone, there's no real big animation that needs to be done. The person stops moving. That's not a challenge. They, become a bit blue or they have some icicles on them. It's not really that big of a change. Junkrat's trap, that doesn't affect their animation at all. But if you're going to be bound by ropes, you're going to have your arms tied to your sides. How are they going to do that? With then a bunch of rope wrapped around you, they would have to make a unique model, basically, for every hero in order to depict that. So while I think it will be a cool power, I think the main reason that we likely won't see this happen in-game is with these technical challenges, or these aesthetic challenges. I'm pretty sure this invention was just included in the comic to show us that Torbjorn is an inventor of a bunch of things, not just turrets. And that wraps up this video. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Did you enjoy this comic? Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you like this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more Overwatch content.